The share. Good morning. Hello, everyone. Nice to have you here from all over the planet. We'll mute everyone. Today's share, we would like to thank our sponsors. So thank you, first of all, to Janet and Stan Zeliger, who are sponsoring Le'ili Nishmas Sheftel Ben Shammai. Your tzed is today. So we thank you so much for the sponsorship. And Neshama should have an aliyah from the words of Torah. Today's shir is also sponsored by Steve and Leah Roth. It's to commemorate the yahrzeit of Leah's father, the husband of Sylvia Slomovitz, Leo Slomovitz, Hananya Yom Tov Lipa Ben Eliezer. So we thank you very much for the sponsorship. Neshama should have an aliyah. The shir is also sponsored by Fegi Libman and Jonah and Lila Libman. It's to commemorate the yahrzeit of Fegi's husband and Jonah's father, Ben Libman. It's the 10th yahrzeit tonight, actually. We remember him well. Dov Nachman Ben Aaron, Yonah, and Fegi Miriam. Zechrona Livracha. So we thank the sponsors. Neshamas should benefit from the words of Torah and from the fact that we could gather virtually over Zoom and study Parashat Ki Tisa. So today we're going to learn about the big mess up. We made a mistake. Our ancestors made a mistake, and they were supposed to experience something incredible with the return of Moshe with the tablets. It was destined to be a moment that would define who we are. We would clearly feel good about ourselves, because when a person does good and a person fulfills their mission, they feel very satisfied, because that's what we humans have to do. In other words, we all need that. We all have our needs. One of our needs is to feel that we're making a difference, that we are accomplishing something. And Judaism has provided for us the tools of feeling good with not something that's external. In other words, it's not that we have to turn to substances and then feel good. We do something that really relates to the core of our existence and our essence. In other words, when we have a commitment to Torah, when we have a commitment to doing good for ourselves and the world, you feel good. And it is a good feeling to feel good when it's right for the right reason. In other words, when you feel good for something external, that the Maple Leafs happen to be playing well, right? Wait till the playoffs. But you feel good about it, but you know very well that this is not something that's fundamental. It's not really your essence. It's a way to relax. No way am I going to put aside the beauty of sometimes having something relaxing to follow. But you know very well this is not your essence. When we do things that we are supposed to do, and they are our identity, it's wonderful. And we almost were there. If our ancestors would have waited a little bit longer and been patient and not start getting nervous that Moshe is not back yet, right? You know, we know the story. He makes his way up to the top of the mountain after Shavuot. 40 days he's supposed to be there. Come day 40, we expect him to return. We messed up a little bit with the calculations, and then we panic. And we panic and we are seeking something to give us some guidance, perhaps some kind of spiritual lift. Whatever the sin of the golden calf was about, it was a mistake. And unfortunately, tradition teaches us that we pay for that mistake. In other words, our whole journey through life, the struggle of human existence, is all the byproduct of not doing things right in this week's Parsha. So it's obviously a very important Parsha to learn, because the message is not going to be just one that was relevant for our ancestors 3,300 years ago, but it's relevant today, right? To be that good person. So that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to study different insights into the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, and perhaps use it as an opportunity to remind ourselves, or especially I have the opportunity here to remind myself what it means to be a good person and a good Jew, and to learn some lessons from the Parsha itself. Now, what's fascinating is that for many commentators, to try to identify the core issue and the core flaw that led to their mistake, to demand from Aaron, Aseh lanu Elohim, Aseh lanu Elohim, make for us some kind of entity to worship. Many of the commentators boil it down to one word. What is that one word? It has 3 letters. So the Torah tells us that after Moshe Rabbeinu gets those tablets from God Almighty, Vaya'ar ha'am, the people saw, or perhaps this is a people sensed, the people saw, ki boshesh Moshe laredet min hahar, that Moshe was boshesh, delayed. Moshe was delayed. When they noticed that Moshe was delayed from descending the mountain, so they turn to Aaron, they gather around Aaron, vayomru elav, and they say to him, Kum, arise, aselanu Elohim, make for us a God, asher yelchu lefanenu. Why? Ze Moshe ha'ish, this fellow Moshe, lo yadanu mahayala, we don't know what happened with him. So the rabbis, many commentators, focus on the word boshesh. Boshesh. What is it about boshesh? So often we start off with the words of Rashi, and Rashi shares with us a tradition, an older tradition, that boshesh relates to the hour, shesh, the 6th hour. And boshesh can be read as bashesh. They calculated that if Moshe Rabbeinu made his way up the mountain on the 6th hour of the day, they expected him, like real yekis, that he's going to be back on the 6th hour of the day 40 days later. And they made 2 mistakes. Number one, this precision with time was a mistake. And number 2, even when it comes to their calculating of days, when he said 40 days, he meant 40 complete days, not including the day he made his way up. So it was an issue of miscalculation by the Hebrews in the wilderness that brought forth this trouble. And some commentators see this as a lesson that, sometimes we have this expectation that everything worked like a clock, right? In other words, you go to an airport in the olden days when we would travel, and the flight is supposed to leave at a specific time, and you hear a 15-minute delay, 20-minute delay, and there's something very agitating about it because you had an expectation that you could pick up your car in Fort Lauderdale at a very specific time. So it's an agitation that we have to teach ourselves that, you know what? For you to believe that everything is going to work exactly as planned is a belief that you are in control. And in Judaism, the first problem that could lead us to a path that is a very destructive one is when we believe that we are in control of everything, right? This is fundamental to believe that it's not so. And the expectation of time, right? And some people have that nature more than others. Unfortunately, in the guilty column, that I sometimes have expectations that things start at a specific time or end at a specific time. And it's a nature that I have to fight. And I have to remind myself that it doesn't work like that. We had a very good lesson over the past year when we learned that we're not in control and how many things we had to plan, we had to replan or cancel. We got our education. So that's perhaps, according to some commentators, lesson number 1 of the boshesh. They see it as an issue of time, expecting things to work in a very specific way. But I would like to share with you two different approaches, but again, focusing on the boshesh, So approach number 1 is the approach of a work called Aktava Kabbalah, or Tzvi Yaakov of Mecklenburg, and he says the following. You know, there are two ways to be delayed. One is an ichur, and one is a boshesh. In other words, if let's say I get invited to a wedding, and originally my intention was to just get in there, say Mazel Tov, and go back home because I'm extremely busy. It is not someone that I'm very close with. I feel it's the right thing to do, to pop in. So if the wedding anyway is right here in the Bait, I might as well go in, wish Mazel Tov to the Chassan Kala or whoever I do know, and fine, and move on, which is a beautiful thing to do, right? Even if you're not close, everyone appreciates this Mazel Tov as it was done in the past. So imagine I come in, and then I realize that there's some friends that I haven't seen in 10 years, 20 years, and I actually notice that for a change on the men's side, they didn't just have the marble cake that usually sits there next to the whiskey, but actually there was something to eat, and it looked appealing. So suddenly I had here people that I would like to talk to, and food that's actually enjoyable, some good sushi, you know, the Jewish way of doing things. So suddenly I decide that, you know what, I'm not running out. Yes, I said Mazel Tov, but if I could schmooze with this friend and I could get something to eat. So although originally I was planning to be in that room for 7 minutes, it turned into an hour. That's an ichur. That's a delay. Okay, that's a delay of ichur. However, if let's say, imagine you are the press secretary of a world leader, and you know deep down that what you are hearing from this world leader is complete absurdity and nonsense. And you, as the press secretary, have the job that you have to communicate, and you have to spin it to the best of your ability to the press. Okay? Now, you have to have Rahmanis on that person. If you remember in the early days of the Trump administration, Sean Spicer, I think was his name. And he had to go ahead and defend some absurdities. Or imagine right now if you are the press secretary of the Prime Minister of Canada, right? Where in Sri Lanka, they're getting already their vaccines, but not in your country, right? That you are behind third world countries that you are supporting. And you are the press secretary, and I don't know how it functions in Ottawa, but imagine you have that job and you know very well that the narishkeit that you are fed are nonsense and they're just trying to make the prime minister look good, but you have to go ahead and stand there in front of the media. So imagine there's a hallway between the office of the prime minister and the podium facing the media. Odds are you're going to walk very, very slowly because you have no desire to stand there and be asked the questions. Imagine you are the press secretary of the governor of New York, Mr. Cuomo, right? The big hero 11 months ago on CNN. Not anymore, right? But Shrek News is coming out about him in the past few days. And you have to explain it. To defend the absurdity, you don't want to do. So you are delayed, but this is not an ichur. This is not a delay because you are enjoying what you are doing beforehand. This is a delay because you're embarrassed. You are embarrassed. You don't want to be there. You don't want to be the one to stand in front of the crowd. You're going to try to delay it and walk very, very slowly, right? That's a boshesh because there's a busha. There's something that is embarrassing with what you need to share. And this commentator notes that the people of Israel know that Moshe Rabbeinu is spending 40 days learning about Torah, learning about a way of living that gives us meaning. But they had some level of negativity. Like, what happens, they wondered, if Moshe Rabbeinu is getting these guidelines that's going to make life difficult for us. We were planning to move into the land of Israel, settle there. But then obviously there'll be direct flights to Thailand and we could have some fun there and enjoy the different cuisine. And they're thinking to themselves, what if Moshe Rabbeinu is going to place limitations on what we enjoy? What if his experience up there in heaven is one that's going to prevent us from interacting or living the way we want? And when they see Moshe being delayed, they projected upon him that it must be that Moshe is not me'acher. It's not that he is having such an experience up there that he feels elevated and connected and clarity. No, he must be delaying his return because he's embarrassed by the message. He is boshesh. And that's the problem. The way the people of Israel, not all of them, by the way, some of our ancestors were okay. I hope mine were okay, but verves. But they were projecting on Moshe that his attitude towards the teachings were, how am I going to teach this to the people of Israel? They're going to be overwhelmed. They're going to be overwhelmed. I wish I could shave off a little bit of the teachings because it's so much for them, right? There was a comedy by years ago, 4 decades ago, Mel Brooks, that when Moshe Rabbeinu came down the mountain, he actually came with 3 tablets, but one of them broke, so therefore there were 10. And that's really what Klal Yisrael's attitude was, that Moshe Rabbeinu would love to shave down all these mitzvos because he's embarrassed to come to us and start talking about kashrut and talking about the importance of self-development. And I always have a desire to speak about others, and I was going to come down with these laws of Lashon Hara. They looked at the delay as the delay of busha, boshesh. Vaya'ar ha'am ki boshesh Moshe laredet minahar. That was the problem. That's the beginning. That is really the beginning of a problem. When we think that the messages of Torah are one that prevents us from living, we can't enjoy love. The travelers on the highway could run into McDonald's and get fast food, and we nebach have to eat the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. When we have such an attitude, there's a problem. Because the reality is that a true Torah Judaism life is one where there's meaning, where we could live a few decades and start asking, where has time gone, right? Just yesterday, I turned, 40, and now look what, and now I'm 50. Like these questions that we struggle with as humans, right? Where is time going? Shon Donnerstag, it's already Thursday. Another year passed. It's again Pesach. Just yesterday. And we start asking, what's life? What are we achieving? What are we doing? But when we go ahead and realize that these teachings are the ones that give us meaning, that we could touch people, that we could interact with people, we could make people's life better. I could find meaning. I could study my tradition. I could study a text that guides me what life is about. It is no busha at all. And that was the problem of our ancestors. They viewed it as a boshesh. So that's another approach. Then I saw a Hasidic approach. We're called Tiferes Shlomo. In the past, we've talked about him, a Hasidic master. I don't remember all the details regarding his life, but I like this brief insight. And he says the following. There's something called humility. And it's very important to be humble. And when we are humble in the proper way, life is better for ourselves and especially for those around us. When I understand that, I don't run the world, number one. Number two, I am no greater than anyone else. When I do good, I'm doing my job. My job is different than the other person's job. So if there's a simple Jew out there and is doing what's right, he's just as good as the greatest Torah scholar because he's doing his part, right? Humility is good. But then there's something called treif humility, right? Humility that's simply not kosher. And that is when a person thinks that humility means I'm worthless, right? That's the no good humility. And he says, this commentator explains the following. The people of Israel knew that Moshe was a humble person, a nav. He was a very humble person. They were afraid that, listen, Moshe Rabbeinu just spent 40 days in a spiritual realm. Obviously, the humble man reached even more of a recognition of how insignificant he is. And he reached it to such an extent that he feels like he's a nobody. And therefore, he doesn't have the courage to come down and teach us. He's embarrassed by the fact that he's nothing once he had experienced the true light in the spiritual realm. Vayar ha'am, the nation sensed that Moshe has a busha. Now, again, that is projecting based on the nation's wrong understanding what humility is. Humility is not I'm a nothing. That's the complete opposite. Humility is I am basically doing my job. I am doing my job. I have a job. God created circumstances in my life. I have to make the right decisions based on these circumstances. Sometimes it's acceptance. Sometimes it's hard work, right? Sometimes it's dealing with a challenge with a smile, whatever. And when I do it, I'm doing my job. Humility is not I'm nothing, not at all. I'm very important. I could be a very humble person and still declare I am very important. Everyone else is important because we all have our job. We do our job, we're good. We don't do our job, we got to work on it that tomorrow's a better day. Humility is not ich bin garnish. No way. No way. That's destructive. How can you achieve things if you don't have self-value? And that was the problem that led them down this dark path, led them to a golden calf, which brought about destruction because they had a misunderstanding of what humility is. They projected upon Moshe abusha. You project upon Moshe abusha, you don't understand what human existence is about. That's how this commentator dealt with this issue. Now, with all explanations given, there is another important detail that the Torah really describes regarding their mistake. And that is, Moshe Rabbeinu hears from God, you know what? The nation is off the path. He prays with intensity. We've obviously have been banking on this prayer because if you look at the structure of our tefillot, when we truly want to make our way into reconnecting with God, we utilize this parsha. When it comes to slichot, it's all turning to this parsha. When it comes to the high holiday season, when it comes to a fast day, the prayers that we rely on, right? We actually say those words often that we pin our hopes on the 13 attributes which are mentioned in this week's parsha. So a lot of good comes out of the parsha because it gives us guidance how to deal with mistakes. And it is fundamental as Jews. Everything can be fixed. You could fix it. Tshuva. But then the Torah describes Moshe Rabbeinu's arrival, and he sees what the nation is doing. So the Torah tells us, Vayehi ka'asher karav el hamachaneh. So it occurs as Moshe makes his way to the camp. So what happens? Vayar et ha'egel, he sees the calf, and then he also sees umecholot, the mecholot. He also sees the dances. Vayicharaf Moshe, and then Moshe Rabbeinu is angry. It flares up his anger. And what does he do? Vayashlech miyadav et haluchot. He goes ahead and threw down the tablets from his hands, and they are shattered. Now, the fact that he suddenly gets angry indicates that there's something new that he sees, information that he wasn't aware of. Now, he did know, God already told him earlier that the nation itself made some kind of image. So what flared up his anger? So there's a key word here. Mecholot. Mecholot. the dances. There was something about the dances. What was the issue with the dances specifically? What was the issue? Why was that the big problem? So here we have an insight of the Sforno, Bavadia Sforno, early 16th century, which is again fundamental. And to understand it, you know, in North America, it is common for people to follow sports. I should say more than North America. It's worldwide. Perhaps it's different sports. People follow sports. And, locally, there's excitement when the Maple Leafs are doing well. Obviously, I spent time in Buffalo, so they're the Buffalo Bills. And even more so in South America, where you have the soccer teams and the World Cup every 4 years. Soccer, now there are benefits in being familiar with what's happening in the sports world. And I used to think when I would be doing kashrut in Buffalo over 20 years ago, and I would have to walk into a plant on a Monday morning. And it was a process. They would want to cook up the syrup that was parav, but the equipment on Friday was used for milchik, so they would go through a koshering. So you'd interact with them and spend some time with them. And obviously you wanted to, create a friendly environment that they should not be intimidated by the rabbi or the kashrut organization and their demands. So overall, we had a very good relationship with all the plants. But the benefit was that in Western New York, you could always talk about the Bills. Usually Monday morning, we would talk about the loss of the Bills the previous day. That was the minhag. So sports has its benefit. I remember reading that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who traveled a lot, he would reach smaller communities to try to inspire the youth. So he would often travel with farmers. And he realized that it would be inappropriate for him to sit with these farmers and not know what they're talking about, because perhaps they would feel uncomfortable, someone sitting there and not participating in the conversation. So he became familiar with animal feed, with different types of feeds for different animals, and all for the sake of conversation. So clearly, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter would know if if the Raptors did or did not win, or if they played or not as well. In other words, he would do his research for the sake of a conversation. So there's a benefit, no doubt, for the sake of a conversation. Now, what about if you want to up it a little bit, that you want to follow sports to relax a little bit? Okay, so also I would give you a stamp of approval, because to only be involved in intense matters is not good. Everyone needs to relax. You could do yoga, which is wonderful. You could go ahead and listen to classical music, put on an André Rieu. Relaxing is very much part of our Judaism. We have to take care of our mental health as well. We have to be happy with kosher things. So no question about it. A little bit of sports, you get a stamp of approval. It's mentioned that in the difference between yeshivot, and I'm talking about Haredi yeshivot in Israel and in the Americas, is the attitude towards even playing sports. While in an Israeli Haredi yeshiva, maybe it's different now, but I'm talking about 30 years ago, playing sports was viewed as not the practice of those who want to reach the peak. In American yeshivot, even Haredi ones, it was always encouraged. And in Telz, they love sharing the story that the great Rabbi Elio Meir Bloch, who was European, and he came to America, he picked up very fast the needs of the American kids, which was not the norm. Often the European Rabbeim were not in tune because they were always still living in Europe. But Rabbi Elio Meir Bloch in Telz, in Cleveland, Friday afternoon, when he would see boys standing around, he would go ahead and bring the ball to them and would encourage them to get active. So there was always a different attitude towards sports in American yeshivot. So for relaxation, we give a stamp of approval. Now, when can it be a little bit of a problem? If, let's say, I decide that I'm going to go ahead and relax and watch a 3-hour ball game. So for me personally, that would not be right. And I'll tell you why. There's something called bitul Torah. In other words, yes, I need to relax, but at the same time, I have the responsibility of studying Torah. I'm not I don't have the tools and the ability to do it 17 hours a day, so I need to relax. But 3 hours relaxation, personally, I don't need it. And if I do it, I enter into that realm of bitul Torah. Now, it obviously depends on every person. Everyone has to assess. But we all have that point that, you know what? I could do something more meaningful with 3 hours, right? Study a Mishnah, call someone that needs some encouragement, be involved in a communal needs. So that's enters into the realm of problem. Now, when does it enter into a realm of serious problem? If I get more excited about my team than excitement as I practice my Judaism, I have a problem. I have to work on that. If I jump for joy when the Uruguayan team does very, very good in the World Cup, and I don't jump for joy on Simchat Torah, there's a little bit of a problem there. Why? Because suddenly it's an indication that what gives me a complete feeling of satisfaction is something external, something that's not my essence. What should be is that when I celebrate on Simchat Torah, I feel, we've concluded, we've read all Parshiot of the Torah. I've completed them all with Rashi. I feel I've achieved something. It gives me guidance. I should feel excited and want to jump for joy. If I don't act like that, if unfortunately I have Lithuanian and German blood in me, and I'm a Kalta Litvak and a Kalta Yeki, and I can't jump for joy on Simchat Torah, but then when I see that Uruguay beat Ghana, I do jump, I have a problem. There's something that I have to work on. How do I know all this? This is how the Sforno, the commentator Rabbi Vadia Sforno, looks at this verse. And he notes that you should know, Moshe Rabbeinu does not have his anger flared up from just seeing a sin. We all make mistakes. The Egel, the golden calf, was not the end of the world. Do you want to know what the real problem was? Mecholot. They needed mechila for mecholot. Why? To dance with excitement and to sense that he sensed more enthusiasm for their golden calf. Then 40 days later at the experience at Sinai, there's a serious problem here. It's a problem that they really don't appreciate what their tradition, what the Torah, what it's all about. That was the major issue. And he notes that when we talk often that, and throughout the parasha, Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Almighty, V'salachta le'avonenu u'lechatatenu, and the chet, he points out the real chet was the enthusiasm, when there's excitement, when the excitement is lacking when you are doing good, but it's there when you're doing something so external, or in this case, something wrong, that is the problem. And here we have a fundamental message that is extremely relevant for us. When a person does good, the most important thing is to give yourself the credit, to tap yourself on the back. When you sat down and studied something, or you make that call to support someone, or you go ahead and are involved in some kind of communal need, whatever it is, or you give tzedakah, you have that obligation to create your mecholot, to remind yourself, you know what? This is amazing. This is an achievement. I am here for that reason. Because if you don't tap yourself on the back, if you don't go ahead and give yourself the credit there's that danger that you're going to seek it somewhere else. And even more so when it comes to educating the next generation. There has to be that feeling that is where we have the achievement. Fine? So that's a message that relates to the sin of the golden calf. But there's another piece of information that is really fundamental. And here we move on to a teaching of Rabbi Meir Simcha of Dvinsk, We've talked a lot about him over the years because it's an issue that I developed an appreciation as I matured, is not to listen to every rabbi. It's very important, very, very important to teach ourselves and the next generation that some rabbis are to be ignored, okay? And it doesn't just relate to rabbis that are alive, that you know very well, that maybe they perhaps have great abilities in memorizing text, or perhaps they could remember halacha. That you have to remember that that doesn't mean that they think straight. They could still be crooked. Even when you read insights that of perhaps great people, if they don't talk to you, you have the right to say, you know what, this is not a text that I turn to. With respect, I could put it back on the shelf. And it's important because if you train a generation that everything they hear is correct and important, and then they hear a message that seems very foreign to them, and you obligate them to accept it, you're going to create confusion. So therefore, a good Rebbe is a Rebbe that knows how to filter things to his students. Not everything you hear has to be taught. You have to tailor things for the generation, for the age group. An interesting story I heard is that there was once a conference many decades ago of rebbes and of rebbes in high school and post high school and yeshivot. And as they're sitting there in the conference, I'll get to address that soon. As they are sitting there at the conference, one of the post-high school rebbeim said, listen here, I teach on a much higher level. I teach a 19-year-old. You over here, you teach 14-year-olds. If so, I don't understand. Since I'm expected to teach on a much higher level, why do I not get paid more? That's what the teacher of the 19-year-olds asked. And the response given by a very wise teacher of the 14-year-old said the following: you should know, we really should get paid more, because when you teach a 14-year-old, you have to study all the information that you would learn to be able to teach a 19-year-old. But then you have to filter what can and cannot be said. You have to analyze their level of understanding, their ability to appreciate. So we work much harder because we have to study everything and then filter things. Okay. The idea I'm trying to get across is that the best would be is if you would have a filter. We have a very nice library here at Bnei Torah, a little bit disorganized at this point, but a very nice library. And there are works that personally I would prefer wouldn't be there. Why? Because they come from a philosophy that doesn't talk to our generation or to our way of thinking. Or perhaps there should be a stamp of approval on books. These books are appropriate for a specific type of Torah thinkers. So it is fundamental when you hear insight into the Parsha or even halacha guidance to know who it's coming from. And all this is an introduction, because if you want to know who I turn to with confidence, that an insight is one in areas of Jewish thought are perfected, it is Rabbi Meir Simcha of Dvinsk, the Or Sameach and the author of the Mesha Chochmah. Because this is a person that is imbued with Torah, but understands humanity, understands humans, and relates to a rational generation. And all this is an introduction to what he shares with us, explaining and analyzing the behavior of Moshe. Moshe sees the people of Israel dancing around the golden calf. What does he do? Vayashlech miyadav et haluchot. He breaks the luchot. So the traditional approach is that he realizes that this is not a nation that is worthy of being connected to God with their behavior. So he breaks that which symbolizes the link, the connection. Fine. Rabbi Meir Simcha says something very, very different. He notes the following. You know, Judaism was given to us to uproot pagan practices. Pagan practices are a belief that, you know what, I could do whatever I want. I could enjoy life. All I need to do is satisfy the gods. If I satisfy the gods, I'll be okay. So I could be a very destructive person. I could be nasty. I could be a crook. I could be a criminal. But if, as a farmer, I do need rain, so I better satisfy the gods of the rains that at a specific time and in a specific season bring an offering to the force, or sometimes if I have some kind of idol or some kind of figure that I worship, I satisfy the gods, mission accomplished. That's paganism. Judaism teaches that's not so. You want rain? Well, there's a Torah. The Torah tells us that you have to have mishpat, you have to have justice, you have to have a judicial system, you have to have tzedek, you have to have righteousness, you have to be concerned for the welfare of the yatom v'almana. You have to be sure that the marketplace is kosher. Kosher meaning that the measurements you use to purchase goods and sell goods are the same measurements. An expectation of honesty and decency in all areas of life. Don't make your Judaism, don't live a life where you try to just satisfy gods and then believe mission accomplished. Now, the problem is sometimes there are those who make Judaism into paganism. In other words, if you have a belief that all I need to do to be blessed is go to a specific wise man for a bracha, so I could do whatever I want. My business practice could be terrible. There could be a chil Hashem from my activity. The media could be following the fact that I break the law in my companies. But due to the fact that I got a blessing from a specific rabbi, right? Or I have some kind of Kabbalistic practices I do, I'm safe with God. Rameir Simcha says that is making Judaism into paganism. And therefore he notes, when you have a pagan nation, a nation that worships a golden calf, if you go ahead and would hand them the luchot, if you would go ahead and hand them the tablets, you know what they would do? They would just use the tablets to take over the role of the egel, meaning they would worship the tablets as they worship the egel. They would make the tablets into an avodah zarah. Such a nation, they don't just not deserve the tablets, it is dangerous to give it to them. When people are living their Judaism in a pagan state, you can't give them something tangible because they'll worship it. That's the danger, he notes, and that's what the Torah is teaching us with Moshe breaking it. And the importance of the message is because it is always so that, yes, Judaism has many, many details. And when we do them correctly, we do them with precision, and we learn the messages and the lessons, it's a magnificent, magnificent way of living. But when you start relying on the fact that I have a high standard, that I only drink a specific milk, so I can look down at others or act in a very disgusting way because my meat is a higher standard than yours, right? Or my vegetables are if I go ahead and take something external and make it devoid of the real lessons of Judaism, you, according to Rameir Simcha of Dvinsk, are taking the luchot. It is, yes, it comes from God, but you're making it into an avodah zarah because you are not living your life as a complete Jew. That's the lesson he gives. And it's a lesson that was relevant 3,400 years ago, and it is obviously relevant today. That there are many ways, it's sometimes, when people don't interact with those who are different than them, and you live in an area where all your friends are basically the same type of Judaism, right? And think the same and act the same, and you're not going to be analyzing what you do and why you do it, because there's no need. No one's going to ever question you. The danger is that your Judaism becomes what's known as a mitzvat anashim melumada. You just do it, you're on autopilot. You do it on autopilot, so it becomes like a practice that you do in a mindless way. Mindless practices where you don't learn the core lessons of Judaism are very dangerous, because luchot, the handwork of God, could turn into an avodah zarah. That is the issue that we have to walk away with from this week's parsha. That's the issue. So those are the main lessons that we have. The boshesh, the problem of being too happy with something that is empty, and then also realizing that if we're not careful, even those good things we do, if they start justifying, if people even stuck out, which is magnificent, if my donation to a specific organization could justify my business practices or the way I interact with people, right, or the way I am at home, that is that danger of avodah zarah. Now, I was asked a very good question. What about people that feel they can't, they're not able to enjoy Simchat Torah? This is a question that's asked. So let me just clarify. Back to Simchat Torah. Dancing doesn't have to be only external. In other words, take a personality like myself and other friends of mine here, that they don't get into the dancing. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have to feel happy. There are different ways. In other words, for me, Simchat Torah, and people who come to shul or used to in the past before Corona would notice I'm not the biggest dancer. But believe me, there's an excitement. And if I'm standing there perhaps with a text, I feel that satisfaction. I express it in my own way. So in no way am I obligating everyone to turn into Hasidic Shi'idin that you're dancing with your payas flying everywhere. I'm the last person that would tell you that. But inside, within us, there has to be this feeling, this is great. And so too, by the way, in 4 weeks from now, less than 4 weeks from now, when you sit at the Seder, right? And yes, perhaps you don't enjoy the matzah so much, perhaps it's not good for the digestive system, and perhaps you miss your peanut butter if you don't eat peanuts, and perhaps the oatmeal for breakfast. With all that, you have to remember, this is a good thing. It is good. It gives me meaning. It gives me guidance. I'm doing something that's meaningful. It connects me back to my ancestors. It connects me to the higher being. That is what's important when it comes to Judaism. Let the mind be active as you are involved with these many different things you do. And then it becomes meaningful. So that's just to touch upon the Simchat Torah. Okay, so that's the humility we have there. So that's what we have. That's what we have regarding this matter. Anyway, hopefully we gained something from a parsha. This Shabbat is a very unique one because we read about the sin of the golden calf, but then it's also Parshat Parah, where we read about the burning of the red heifer. And it's a practice that is beyond logic. It's a practice that we do where we completely accept what the Almighty says that we do. That's the burning of the red heifer for purification. It's one of the years when we read about the golden calf, when we read about that which brought forth the atonement of the golden calf. And that's how we prepare for Pesach. So remember, the Shabbos not just to read Parshat Ki Tisa, but also to read from the beginning of Parshat Chukat, where we read about the burning of the red heifer. And when we talk about purification, may the Almighty purify and elevate us, that we should merit indeed better days, which Bezrat Hashem, they will come. Thank you again to our sponsors. So thank you again to Janet and Stan Zelliger for sponsoring the Neshama Shadav and Aliyah. Thank you to Steve and Leah Roth again for sponsoring the Neshama of Leo Slomovitz, Hananya Yom Tov Lipa Ben Eliezer Shad and Aliyah. And thank you to Fagi Libman, Jonah Lila Libman, who sponsored to commemorate the yahrzeit tonight, 10th yahrzeit of our dear Ben Libman, Dov Nachman, Ben Aharon, Yonah Vefega. Miriam Neshama should have an Aliyah.